Unwanted Teamsters union officials out of power at their workplace. What does this mean? What does this mean to us locally? Is this a big deal in San Diego? Joining us now, Mark Mix. He's the National Right to Work Foundation president, and wanted to chat with him about this victory for right to work in San Diego. Maybe, Mark, a little bit of an odd place here in California for us to find a situation where we get a victory on something like this. What's your reaction to that?
Well, good evening, gentlemen, if I can still say that in California, but this is indeed a victory for the workers in California. And interestingly enough, Leland and Mark, we've got a few of these over just the last couple of months where workers there are trying to break free of the compulsion and the force that union officials can exercise in your state and can exercise in 23 other states across the country that don't have right to work laws. And so this is a good victory for those folks. We've worked with some AT&T mobility in-home experts in California, and the Communication Workers of America Union walked away from that unit. That was, I think, over 400 people in California. But as you two mentioned at the top of the hour, this is not a story that gets a whole lot of attention in California, so I'm glad you're interested.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the real question here is, if you could explain to us, why is it legal in some states for unions to force people to join the union? Because as I made clear, I'm not anti-union. I'm pro the ability of people to gather together and bargain together, and that's as quintessentially American as it gets. But the un-American side is when you force people that don't want to be part of your group, however many there may be. Why is that the case? That in some states in this country, they're allowed to do what they've done here?
Yeah, well, it goes back to the 1930s, and not that we'll go on that journey this evening, but during the Roosevelt administration, the federal government had a crisis that they were trying to solve, and a government never lets a good crisis go to waste. Mm-hmm. And so in that particular period of time, they imposed unionism, forced unionism across the entire country when the federal government took over the labor management relations for private sector workers. So from 1935, when the law passed, to 1937, when the Supreme Court upheld it, until this very day, it's the federal law that imposes forced unionism on workers in California. Well, in the lead up to that incredible union growth from 1937 to 1947, Congress came back and said, you know what, we may have gone too far, and so they passed what is known as the Taft-Hartley Act, which allows states the privilege, and I use that word correctly because it's a privilege granted by the federal government for states to pass what are known as right-to-work laws. And gentlemen, that law is very simple. It just believes this, that you can't lose your job for failure to tender dues or fees to a private organization that unfortunately has the right to represent you without your ascension, without your affirmative vote, but they can force their representation on you and then force you to pay for that as well. It's outrageous, it's wrong, but like you said, the ability for workers to join together voluntarily to amplify their voice,
fine.
We're in favor of that.
Yeah, and of course here in the middle of California, you look at whether it's the teachers' unions, and teachers are wonderful, but the unions have been pretty heavy-handed on who they're endorsing. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on not on stuff for the classroom, but for political advertising, lobbying, and all of that. And it's difficult for the rank and file to opt out. And we still know that here in California, for example, that the majority of people aren't union members, which doesn't mean that they work less. Sometimes during these political cycles, it's like, we're for the working people and good union jobs. Candidates say it all the time. So that's not exactly all-encompassing, to make everybody feel good about work. Yeah.
Well, that's right. And only about 6% of the private sector workforce is unionized across America. It's a little higher from a union density standpoint in California, of course, because, unions have dramatic power out there, as you mentioned, Mark. And it's an interesting phenomenon because these people at Reliance Metal Center had to wait for up to 3 years to try to throw out a union that they admitted in public comments saying they've been failing to represent them professionally for the last 8 years. But because of the federal law, they had to wait to a very narrow window, 90 days before and 60 days before a contract expiration, in order to thread the needle to have this vote to say we no longer want the Teamsters here in our workplace. So it's not easy, and it's a big victory. And as I mentioned, we have a growing number of cases in California who are workers who are trying to exercise these rights, just like these folks did at Reliance Metal Center, throwing the Teamster Union out of their workplace.
We're talking with Mark Mix, National Right to Work Foundation president. I guess the devil's advocate side here, just to be sure we're kind of telling the whole story, on the side of the unions, what I always hear my friends, because I've got quite a few friends that are in UAW, being from Kentucky and, the Louisville truck plant and that, and those are great guys. and I love those guys, and they're hard-working dudes. But they will tell you, like, well, wait a minute now. They'll be like, we're representing you, and you're benefiting from that. That's why we want you to pay up on that. What's the answer to that from your perspective of saying you are benefiting from whatever collective bargaining they're doing? You just don't want to be forced to pay, and that's where it gets a little murky in the argument sometimes.
Yeah, Leland, it's a topically attractive argument. Union officials use it all the time, but here's the problem with that. It's the forced association that comes with this union monopoly power. Once the union wins, let's say you have 100 people in a unit and 50 people vote and 26 people vote for the union, that means the union represents all 100 people, even the people that didn't vote or voted no. Now, people say, well, that's just democracy. Well, democracy doesn't work when it comes to certain individual freedom and individual associational rights, and that's what happens here. We have tried to get union officials to agree to represent only those workers that want to be part of the union, that are excited about being in the union. You know, it was Samuel Gompers, the founder of the American labor movement, who said this: the workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. If you try to force and coerce, you will destroy a movement that inherently is stronger through voluntary mechanisms. And so this idea of force is something that union officials, they embrace it because it gives them tremendous power over the workplace and gives them a bounty of forced dues that they use and turn around for politics, like you said, especially in California.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Listen, Mark Mix, it's great talking to you. Thanks so much for being willing to come on and kind of give us a little bit of the point of view on this. National Right to Work Foundation President Mark Mix, thanks for your time.
Yeah, good stuff.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Good info. Keep up a good fight.